everybody, and welcome to Charts with Dan. We are a little bit delayed this week because yesterday I did a video covering the breaking news about Michael Keaton's possible return to the role of Batman in a new Flash film. If you haven't seen that video, there's a little card that pops up right there at the top of the screen. You can check it out. But it's good because I actually was able to gather some more information about the box office this past weekend. And, you know, we've been saying for the last few weeks that the new movies that are coming out, movies like The Wretched and Becky and the ones that we've seen over and over again on the charts, are the ones that are being reported, but we never really know what's actually number one. Well, that information is starting to be released, not officially by the studios, but through different outlets in the media, and we can now get a much better idea of what movies are actually at the top of the box office charts. And this past weekend, it was actually a couple of Steven Spielberg classics that recaptured their slots at the top of the box office. And the number one film in the country, according to a report from Deadline this past weekend, was Jurassic Park. Steven Spielberg's 1993 classic was the number one film in the country, due largely reportedly to drive-in theater screenings. Deadline's report also said that of the 201 highest grossing theaters in the country, 160 of them were drive-in movie theaters. And there are some brick-and-mortar theaters that are open. Reportedly, a few of the Cinemark theaters that reopened, they're slowly reopening a lot of their theaters, drew fairly low numbers. So it does seem like moviegoers right now are much more confident in going to drive-in theaters when and where they can find them, and they are producing great numbers. As I mentioned, Jurassic Park, the number one film of the weekend. The number two film of the weekend, another Steven Spielberg summer hit, Jaws, my favorite movie. So, of course, it's great to see Jaws at number two. How crazy to think, though, if you would have thought about at the beginning of this summer that we would be in mid-June and the two top films would be movies from 27 to 45 years ago. That's pretty crazy. It is kind of neat, though. Jaws just celebrated its 45th anniversary, hard to believe, of release, and that it celebrated that milestone by being the number two film at the box office. The Invisible Man, Trolls World Tour, and The Hunt rounded out the top five, which means that Universal films make up all five films in the top five this past weekend. And just because it's so interesting to see what exactly is in the top 10, I expanded the list out to look beyond the top five. So these were the top 6 through 10 movies of the weekend. Back to the Future, another Universal film, was number 6. Followed is the only new release, meaning movie that's been released after the theater shutdown, that even cracks the top 10. It comes there at number 7. It's a horror movie about a social media influencer staying at a haunted hotel. This is something Mara keeps trying to get me to do, which I steadfastly refuse to do because I am scared of ghosts. E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Jumanji the Next Level, and The Goonies round out the top 10. So when you look at those 10 movies, Jurassic Park, Jaws, E.T., Back to the Future, and The Goonies all involve Steven Spielberg in either a directing or producing capacity. Just another testament to the fact that his films really do stand the test of time, and it is what a lot of people are turning to. And Universal also making their back library accessible for booking, for theaters to show. There's been a lot of supposedly bad blood between Universal and particularly AMC, but a lot of the distribution chains. But here we see Universal licensing a lot of their films to these theaters that's drawing crowds, a lot of crowds at the drive-ins. So they are figuring out a way to make money where many other studios just don't have that revenue stream available right now. Now, this is not the only weekend that Deadline reported. They also reported box office numbers from last weekend, and it was a little bit similar, although newer releases did constitute more of the top 5. So let's look at a revised version of the top 10 movies from last weekend, which would have been Father's Day weekend. The Invisible Man and Trolls World Tour were numbers 1 and 2 last weekend, but Back to the Future is there at number 3, followed by The Hunt and Jumanji, The Next Level. And then when we look at numbers 6 through 10, E.T. the Extraterrestrial was the 6th ranked movie, followed by 2 newer releases, Becky and Infamous. Those were in the top 5 that I reported last weekend because those were the numbers that we had at the time. Jurassic Park and The Goonies rounded out the top 10. Now let's take a look back, a flashback to, even though it's great to see Jurassic Park and Jaws doing so well, a more successful weekend at the box office. And we're going back 25 years. Last week we talked about the fact that 5 years ago, Jurassic World broke the domestic opening weekend record. We're going to cover another movie that broke that record 25 years ago, and that is Batman Forever. June 16th through 18th, 1995, Batman Forever set a new opening weekend record when it opened to just over $52 million at the box office. That's not adjusted for inflation. This would be Val Kilmer's only turn as the Caped Crusader. And of course, some very sad news involving the director of that film, Joel Schumacher, whom I will address in just a minute. But very quickly, I just want to run through the rest of this top five. Congo from writer Michael Crichton was in second place, followed by Casper, The Bridges of Madison County, and Die Hard with a Vengeance. When you look at that lineup in those five films, that's a pretty good 90s lineup, I have to say. From Batman to Casper to Clint Eastwood and Meryl Streep, a very weird, odd summer lineup, but very fitting for the time. Now, as I mentioned, Batman Forever broke the opening weekend record that week, and then talking about Jurassic World last week, I wanted to kind of look at if there were any patterns or what it looked like when you look at the movies that have broken the record domestically for opening weekend gross. And the furthest back that I could find that data goes back to Jaws, the number 2 film in the country, back in 1975, which is one of the first ones reported to have broken that record. So when you look at the numbers not adjusted for inflation, you see a curve that seems to go up exponentially, particularly when you hit the 21st century. Jurassic Park, which was this week's number 1 movie, set the record back in 1993. That record was broken by Batman Forever. And then the sequel to Jurassic Park, The Lost World, would break that record, and then that would hold until 2001 with Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And then it really started changing hands even more quickly. So you can see that curve going up. It seems like at a very accelerated rate. Once you go past 2000, 2001, you get into Spider-Man, you get into a lot of the comic book films. And that trend is certainly true. But when you adjust the numbers for inflation, one really interesting pattern that I saw emerge is it's not so much one steady curve when you look at inflation-adjusted numbers. It's more of a series of eras or a series of stages as to how the box office is broken. So here are the numbers when you adjust for inflation, and you can really see that it does kind of break into what I call little eras. You have an era starting at Jaws that went up to Return of the Jedi. Then Return of the Jedi, the numbers jump, and then you have another little gap there between Return of the Jedi to Batman in 1989. Then the numbers jump up again. You have a few years from Batman to Batman Forever. Then you have a couple big pops with The Lost World, Jurassic Park, and Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, where it really jumped up again. And then once you jump up to Spider-Man, you have another kind of a plateau from Spider-Man in 2002 to Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, where the number stays, within about $20 million of each other. Then you see another big jump up to the era starting in 2012 with the Avengers and Jurassic World, The Force Awakens, and then Infinity War. And then this astronomical leap going up to Avengers Endgame. So I think that's an interesting thing to look at because you can almost see the number of screens as they built, the number, the hype machine, the access to films. You can see the growth of theatrical distribution and exhibition and the strategy for studios as they're opening more movies on more screens as things become more front-loaded and that opening weekend number takes up more and more importance. And then historically, I think what's going to be interesting to look at is we've been thinking forever that we're just on a constant growth cycle, and that the opening weekend record was made to be broken. What's going to be very interesting as we look at the data, obviously coming out of this year, it's going to crater, but in the next 2 years, are we looking at, with Avengers Endgame, the peak of theatrical exhibition as far as the records that we have and the records that we have detailed record keeping of. It could be that we could be on a downward trend because there's still no telling what the future holds for the theatrical exhibition market. If another movie like Avengers Endgame is going to draw in that kind of crowd again, and if the market is even going to stay the same. So it is interesting to look at those numbers both when you adjust and don't adjust for inflation. But hard to believe it's been 25 years, for me at least, since Batman Forever hit the big screen. I was a big fan of that movie. I was a big Batman fan. I remain a big Batman fan. And as I mentioned, the director of that film, Joel Schumacher, as we were recognizing the 25th anniversary of that film and as the news came out about Michael Keaton potentially returning to the role. The news broke yesterday that Joel Schumacher had passed away at the age of 80. Schumacher directed both Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. I encourage you to look at the stories behind the making of those films, though, because yes, Schumacher was a very extravagant filmmaker at times. He had a very, very forward style and a very distinct style, but this was also at the request of the studio. Following Batman Returns, the corporate partners that Warner Brothers had been working with were not happy at the dark tone of the film, and Joel Schumacher was hired and given a directive to make it brighter, to make it more family friendly, more kid friendly, because that was the way that the studio wanted to go. So he's been very forward and upfront about the reception to that film. There's some great documentaries on the later editions of Batman Forever and Batman and Robin on Blu-ray, and I think also on DVD, where that legacy is discussed very frankly. And let's not forget, too, that Batman Forever was a massive hit that revitalized the franchise. But beyond Batman, Joel Schumacher had such a varied filmography. So first of all, let's look at the top films from his career when you adjust for inflation. Batman Forever was the #1 film, followed by A Time to Kill, which was a John Grisham adaptation. That helped launch the career of Matthew McConaughey. Then Batman and Robin, The Client, another John Grisham adaptation, and Flatliners in 1990, which featured, among others, a young Julia Roberts. Joel Schumacher was also the director of the 80s teen vampire film The Lost Boys, which I actually just saw for the first time recently and think might be the most 80s thing ever produced. The Michael Douglas One Bad Day drama Falling Down, which a lot more people have found in the years since it was released. The Brat Pack career launcher St. Elmo's Fire, and the Cate Blanchett drama Veronica Guerin, amongst many, many, many other films. He also had a very singular eye for talent. He helped launch the careers of Julia Roberts. He gave an early roles to Philip Seymour Hoffman, to, as I mentioned, Matthew McConaughey, to Sandra Bullock. He was also a director that you could tell was very unapologetic and was very confident in the bold choices that he was making. Did all those choices work? No. They did not work all the time. But he also leaves behind a legacy of some really, really great films. Obviously, very sad to lose a talent like Joel Schumacher. Also compounded by the fact that late last week we received word that Ian Holm also had passed away at the age of 88. Ian Holm was an actor who was known early on for his amazing work on stage, but would later go on to be in several landmark films, including playing the evil android Ash in Ridley Scott's Alien. He appeared in Time Bandits as Napoleon, one of many, many collaborations he would do with Terry Gilliam. He got an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor for his role in the Best Picture winner, Chariots of Fire. He was in The Fifth Element. He was the voice of Skinner in the Pixar film Ratatouille. But I think for a lot of people, his later career will be remembered for his role as Bilbo Baggins in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings films and the Hobbit films. He was one of the titans of acting, and to see an actor like Ian Holm, whose career covered so much ground and so many different kinds of films, it's sad to lose an actor of that caliber who's been in so many films that mean so much to so many people. But at the same time, it is a chance to remember him, remember his work, and revisit some of those films. We had actually just watched Alien for a video that's coming up on the channel, and to see his work as Ash and how creepy he is in that movie, it just goes to show you that he could really pull off that kind of evil and creepiness, but also the warmth and almost melancholy that he needed for his role as Bilbo in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Truly a great actor. I cannot think of a movie I've seen him in where his performance was bad, and a great loss to the acting world, to Hollywood, obviously to his friends and family. So a bit of a tough week when it comes to losing people in the entertainment industry and in the film industry that we remember, but we can always remember them, and one of the only comforts of losing some people of those stature is that we will have their work forever on film as a living memorial to who they were and what they dedicated their life and their craft to. So moving on to the charts, charts that are not box office charts, but what are people watching at home? Let's start off with Amazon and the top 10 movies that have been bought and rented on Amazon. And The King of Staten Island remains at the top, followed by Scoob, Bloodshot, Jumanji: The Next Level, and Sonic the Hedgehog. The Gentlemen and Bad Boys for Life are two titles that have been on the chart for a long time that carry over. Then we've got Grown Ups 2. People just want the Sandman. We saw a big Sandman pop on Netflix. Now we've got Grown Ups 2 popping over on Amazon. Then Trolls World Tour and Hook. I don't know why. I couldn't tell you why Hook is popping up there, other than Robin Williams and Dustin Hoffman are great in that movie. Let's look at what people are watching over on iTunes. And the number one film, actually back on top, is Trolls World Tour. We're seeing a bit of a pop on Trolls, followed by 2019's Charlie's Angels, which may seem a little weird, but it is one of the 99-cent rentals this week for iTunes, so that's why it's there at number 2. Then we have The King of Staten Island at number 3. The Kevin Bacon, Amanda Seyfried horror film, You Should Have Left, at number 4. Then a 2-film collection of Trolls, the first 2 films that are on sale together for $25. That takes up the number 5 spot. Then 1917, The Invisible Man, Ip Man 4, which is a 99-cent rental currently, Sonic the Hedgehog, and somewhat inexplicably R.I.P.D., which is not a 99-cent rental, and I couldn't really see a big promotional push for it. It's weird. Last week we had The Great Outdoors. This week we've got R.I.P.D. Why these movies are jumping into the top 10, I couldn't tell you. I guess people were just in the mood for a Jeff Bridges, Ryan Reynolds paranormal cop movie this past week, because that's the number 10 movie on iTunes. So good for them. More people might be watching it now than did when it came out in theaters. Let's look over at Netflix and see what people are watching over there. There are only 2 holdovers from last week. 365 Days is there at the number 1 spot. That's followed by the 2014 critically, let's say, not adored film, The Nut Job. Then the dance film, Feel the Beat, which is distributed by Netflix. The French action film, Lost Bullet, which is also being distributed by Netflix. Then we have the 2008 Amy Poehler Tina Fey comedy, Baby Mama. Wasp Network, which is an international co-production that Netflix is distributing. Magnetic, which is a documentary about global thrill-seeking athletes. The Darkness, which is a Kevin Bacon horror film that was apparently for the people that didn't want to buy You Should Have Left and just said, like, you know what, I'm not going to buy that one. I've got Netflix. Do we have Kevin Bacon horror? There we go. Let's watch The Darkness. Then Spike Lee's To Five Bloods, which actually takes a pretty big drop. And then Despicable Me, which is an old standby over on Netflix. And then we have our 2 countdowns that we are continuing to conduct here on the show. First of all, we have the countdown to new movies, which looks more and more solid. We are 17 days away from the release of Unhinged, which is still reportedly set to be the first new nationwide release since March. And the one big piece of information that we have this week is announcements from the major chains as to when they are planning to open their doors. AMC really kind of tripped out of the gate with their announcement that they're going to be reopening 450 of their theaters on July 15th. Of course, there was a huge uproar when they initially said that they would not be requiring masks in order to avoid being drawn into a political debate, which is in my mind a little bit odd. But after a lot of public outcry, including, I'm going to be honest, from me, they reversed that policy, so masks will now be required when they reopen those theaters. Regal has announced that they are going to begin reopening their theaters on July 10th, and Cinemark has announced that they plan to have all of their theaters reopened by July 17th. So we are on track for Unhinged to be the first new nationwide release. We may have to remove that question mark pretty soon from the countdown. One countdown I am not ready to remove the question mark from just yet is the countdown to New Mutants. We remain allegedly 66 days away from the release of the New Mutants in theaters everywhere. Will that happen? Will it not happen? I don't know. We just lost the SpongeBob movie. The SpongeBob movie was pushed to home release. It was supposed to come out later this summer. It will now come out on home release. There are still movies moving around. Is New Mutants going to be one of them? We don't know. A lot of it, I think, is going to depend, honestly, on how the reopening goes with all of these theater chains and how the case numbers go in some states, big states, where cases are now reportedly trending in the wrong direction. But there's a lot to be said between here and there. Right now, things are still on track for a resumption in large part of theatrical exhibition with a lot of modifications, including very limited capacity to begin with. That's all my charts. That's all the countdowns and number ones. What do you think about the box office? Are you surprised to see Jaws and Jurassic Jurassic Park back up there at number 1 and number 2. Let me know down in the comments below. And if you want to join in on even more of this fun, you can hop on over to Patreon at patreon.com/Dan Murrell. We're getting toward the end of the month, which means we're cooking up a lot of fun stuff. I'm about to wrap up this month's Dan's Monthly Movie Club, and the 3 movies we're going to be talking about this month are The Big Lebowski, Get Out, and Starship Troopers. 3 movies I can't wait to break down. So you can head on over there if you want to join and become part of Dan's Monthly Movie Club. We just did our monthly patron-only Q&A. There will be another movie commentary coming very soon at the beginning of next month, so we'd love to have you over there. And as a matter of fact, here are some of the producer-level patrons who help support me and help get this going and keep this going every month. It's been so much fun to build this out, to meet new people, to see familiar faces, and I would love to see you over there. But if you just want to hang out here on YouTube, I really appreciate you watching the videos here as well. I'll be back next week with even more information. Are we going to get official numbers, or are we going to be waiting for these reports? Are there going to be any other movie classics that jump up to the top of the chart unexpectedly? We'll find out next week. Until then, thanks for watching.